QuickBooks Online 2021 Reoccurring Transactions Overview. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Online 2021. Quick reminder that if you are practicing with QuickBooks Online, you might want to try out and see if you can get access to the free 30-day test trial, which you can look into by going to the Intuit website, Intuit being the owner of QuickBooks at intuit.com. Going into the QuickBook item here, then I would typically scroll all the way down to the bottom where you have then your products, go into your QuickBooks Online product at that point in time and see if you could get the free 30-day trial to kind of go through your test file period. If that would be applicable, you would do so by toggling this to the right, which is scary because it jumps up the price, but we're just looking for the free trial period here. And if you want to purchase the software after you're comfortable with the software being able to do what you want it to do with the free 30-day trial, you could probably find then a discount if you were to look around on it. Then you would basically check it out with the free 30-day trial. I don't think you need the credit card to do so. Once in there, once you got the software set up in one way, shape, or form, also note that you can, of course, use the QuickBooks Online test drive file for testing something like memorized transactions out as well. And you could find that by going to QuickBooks Online Test Drive, QuickBooks Online Test Drive, and then you would want to go into the test drive file and then use the test drive to practice then the transaction. Looks like this, Craig's Design and Landscaping. We're going to be using the prior file we worked in a prior section of our problem just to work with the memorized transactions. You shouldn't need, it'll have some data in it already, but you shouldn't need that data to move forward. Here we are in our QuickBooks Online practice file. When you're taking a look at the transactions that can be reoccurring, you can go to the cog up top and go into the reoccurring transactions. This is one way to get there. Obviously, when you go through the transactions, we can then make them reoccurring and may decide to do so as we do some entering of the transactions. So if I go into the reoccurring transactions here, then we'll have our information. Obviously, nothing is reoccurring at this point in time. We've got the reminder list up top, and we can run a report if we so choose as well. Within the filter fields, we'll give you some kind of idea of the reoccurring transactions just looking at the filters, where we have the transactions that we can have scheduled, we can have transactions that are reminded, and we can have transactions that are unscheduled. So if we set up a transaction, say a reoccurring bill or something like that, we could schedule it to basically be processed and entered every time. Or we can say I want a reminder of it every time, so I can then go in and give myself kind of a double check, or have it unscheduled type of transaction as well, possibly being used more like as a template that we can have if necessary, but not have it be scheduled as then the transaction. So if we go into the types of transactions that we're usually going to be thinking about reoccurring, I'm going to jump over to the QuickBooks desktop just so we can look at the flow chart. So you don't need the desktop version we're using online, but just to take a look at the flow chart here. Note that when you're entering transactions that you might say are going to be reoccurring, some of the ones that would come to mind most often would be something like a bill. So you'd have the bill that you might put in as reoccurring because it's a transaction that's going to happen every month, possibly like for a software company or something like that. You're paying, say, for an app, then you got to pay every month. And then, so you might have the bill go in every month, and then you may go in and basically pay it after that. And you might then use the bill as kind of your reminder to pay it in a more of a full service kind of bookkeeping system. Or you might just enter, say, a check or an expense type of form and record the reoccurring transaction periodically just as an expense form, as opposed to a bill that would go in and out of the accounts receivable. Also, you can kind of think about how bank feeds would tie into this. If you're doing a full service bookkeeping system, then you would enter either the bill or the check first, and then it would then flow through with the bank feeds, and you would use the bank for the reconciliation process. You can also think of reoccurring transactions on the sales cycle of things, possibly having an invoice, for example, for services maybe that we provide on a reoccurring basis. Maybe we do our bookkeeping service or our landscaping service or our tax services, some kind of service on a monthly basis, have a reoccurring type of invoice that we want to basically set up, or possibly we have a complex invoice with a complex list of items that we want to kind of memorize that we're going to be pulling up. Those are going to be the normal type of transactions that would kind of come to mind for creation of a reoccurring transaction. Just a quick look at it, what you would probably do when doing a reoccurring transaction is to say, I'm going to add an item here. Let's pretend it's going to be let's make it just a bill type of item. And so let's say we were entering the bill here, and we'll put the bill, I'm just going to call it to miscellaneous vendor, and then I'm going to put down here that it's going to be for a category, office supplies. And so I'm not sure this would be a reoccurring type of activity here, but that's going to be our example. We have reoccurring for office supplies. I'm going to put this back in the prior year, 01/01/20. So it's before the current date, so it might then show up on our reminder list. And then if I wanted to make it reoccurring, then I can go down here to the make reoccurring item. And that kind of actually jumps us up to the top of the form. So now we're kind of like at the top of the form. If I scroll down, you see the detail. I'm going up top to the recurring transaction, miscellaneous, scheduled. Here's our 3 options. We could schedule it. We can have a reminder. We can have it unscheduled. I'm going to say a reminder for now. And I'm going to say I want to remind it basically 5 days before the transaction date. So I'm going to have the reminder 5 days before. The vendor is going to be already applied here. Interval, monthly, weekly, daily, yearly. Most likely, the most common interval is probably monthly, but you have your options there. Monthly on day, I'm going to say first Monday. So I'm going to say first Monday of every month. So it's a Monday that we work on because the weekend we're not going to be working. And then start, let's say we're going to start it. And I'm going to bring this all the way out. I'm going to say January 1st. So that's prior to the current date, so we should have some activity. Let's make it last year. I'm going to say December, let's say November 1st. Okay, and then the end date, I'm going to say none, no end date. If I choose an end date, then I've got an end date here. I'm just going to say none. It's just going to go on forever, I believe, if I don't choose an end date. So then we have the mailing address and the terms. I'll keep that as is, and then I'm going to save the template. Save the template. This transaction has 1 or more missing fields, so I'm missing a field, so it won't let me do it. The recurring transaction start date can't be blank. I have a start date. There it is. Let's try it again. So they won't let me go back in time and backdate it for practice problems here. So I'm going to say save it and close. I put it in as of today's date, and then I saved it. So I put it in as today's date, and then I saved it. So if I go then back on over, and if I go to the cog up top, and we then go into our reminders or recurring transactions, here we've got the recurring transaction, the miscellaneous, the bill. It's going to be every month on the reminders, and we can filter by those items here as well. So just a quick recap then of the types of things you might think about basically using the reminders for. And you might want to think about how they might integrate with, again, like bank feeds or something like that. Are you using a full service bookkeeping system or kind of reliant on the bank feeds making the books from the banks? But anything like a loan or lease payment might be something that's going to be reoccurring type of transaction. That's when where you might want a reminder, because if you're taking the loan or lease payment that you're being paid and you have interest and the principal that is due, it could have a different amount applied to interest and principal. So the reminder could remind you to do the bill so that you can then go in there and enter it and then do the proper allocation of interest and principal. Any kind of reoccurring bill, of course, would be something that you might want to enter. So if you had any kind of transaction that happens, periodically, you pay the same amount every month, then that would be a transaction you would be considering. You might enter it as a bill. If you're entering it as a bill, you're doing more of a full service bookkeeping system, because if you enter it as a bill, that enters it on our side. And then of course you have to pay the bill, which you might be doing with, say, bank feeds. The bank feed might come through as a check, and then you can kind of do a double check possibly using that system. Or you can do a reoccurring check or expense form, the form that's not an accrual type of transaction so much, but one decreasing the checking account directly. And again, you can enter the bill or check forms on our side, right, on the bookkeeping side, and then possibly tie them out then to the bank feeds that might happen or come through if you're using bank feeds. Health insurance is obviously something that could happen on a monthly type of basis or a periodic basis. You might pay it every quarter, you might pay it every year, but you might want a reminder about it. And those things that aren't every month oftentimes are good to be reminders as well. If it's paid every 6 months, you might want a reminder of it, and might want a couple reminders. So a standard withholding, like for the owner, if you take money out every month, then you might want that to just be a kind of a reoccurring transaction that's going to happen every month to show the money that's being pulled out. If it's rent is something that, of course, could be a reoccurring type of transaction. On the sales side of things, so when you make a sale, you could have reoccurring sales transactions for service or products supplied monthly. So if you're doing some type of business, if we are the app store and we're providing an app or something like that, and we're billing monthly, we're invoicing monthly, then we might have a reoccurring type of system there on the sales side. Any rent collections, we're the landlord, imagining in this situation, then we're expecting then the rent collection to be happening. We might have a reoccurring transaction situation there for an invoice. And then monthly installment payments due from a customer. So if there's kind of an installment payment type of system set up, then we might want a reoccurring transactions there. You also might kind of consider journal entries. So that would be like adjusting entries, things like depreciation, which are going to happen typically every month or something like that. If you're recording monthly, then you might have something there. Other adjusting entries could be applicable as well. For example, insurance. You might put the insurance on the books as an asset, and then you might figure out what the adjusting entry should be, reducing the asset, recording the expense periodically, possibly monthly, and then do that basically and see if you can set up a reoccurring transaction in the form of like a journal entry possibly that would then record that adjusting entry, those accrual type of adjustments on a periodic basis.